On this episode of Militaria at the museum, we uncover some early stone markings placed by the British. Next, we journey to Stanley Airport to explore the touching story of John Hartley and Merle Dunbar. Finally, we examine load-bearing equipment, showcasing the craftsmanship and durability of tools built to withstand the harsh realities of battle. Beyond museum exhibits lies a hidden realm of archived artifacts that hold the keys to unlocking intriguing stories from the past. Come along as I meet with experts at the Army, Naval, and Aviation museums, where I've been granted special access to pull back the curtains and reveal the secrets of their militaria. My name is Sandy Hiltz, and all my life I've been captivated by military history. Now, I have the rare opportunity to explore a collection of fascinating military artifacts on Militaria at the museum. At the Naval Museum, we're exploring the British War Department stone markers. These markers, identified by the broad arrow symbol, were vital in organizing military infrastructure and identifying government-owned properties. Of all the symbols present here at the Naval Museum, none seems to be more prominent than the British broad arrow. Why is that?
Well, Canadian history is rooted both in the French Empire but also in the British Empire. And the British Empire is very good at making sure that everybody knew what their property was, what their objects were, and when they claimed the property, they also claimed jurisdiction over that property. So they used the broad arrow as a symbol of the British Empire, and we have many objects that have that. We'll take a look at a few of those.
When I come upon a broad arrow like this, what exactly is it telling me?
Broad arrow is the mark for possession of property by the British Empire. You'll find this particular mark on many different stones in Halifax, but all across Nova Scotia as well. And everywhere in the Empire, you'll find stones very much like this one.
And we talk about it being on stones. Where else might I see this if I was to wander around the city?
You'll find these all over Halifax for sure. You'll find a lot of them down in Shelburne. Shelburne at one point was the largest town in Nova Scotia. But for us, we're only looking at what's around in Halifax, and you will find them either side of the Citadel. You'll find them on the corners of this property here, Stadacona, but you'll also find a large number of them over in McNabb's Island and a large number of them down in Point Pleasant Park. Point Pleasant Park was originally a fort site.
Now, the broad arrow was not solely used to mark land, was it?
No, you'll find it on any object that the British Empire, particularly the Ordnance Department or the War Department, commissioned to have designed and built. So you'll find it on guns, you'll find it on some uniforms. The stones you'll only find with property markings.
What sort of time period was it that the broad arrow was used by the British?
Starting in the early part of the 14th century. So it's been around for a very long time. They've been reorganized many times as well, much like any other government department. So that's why the Board of Ordnance ended up with most of the control over the markings that are for property, because they would be strategic for British to be able to use either in tactical situations or producing materials for the Army and the Navy or for the government.
This was something that was phased out in Canada, I think, within the first few years of the 20th century. What came after that?
Canada stopped using strictly the broad arrow, but what they did use right through the Second World War was a broad arrow inside the symbol C for Canadian broad arrow. At the point that stone markers were no longer used, surveying of the properties became much more general. There's always been surveying, but the stone markers were meant to correspond to marks on a map.
When I see an example like this, particularly carved into granite, it certainly feels as if the broad arrow truly symbolizes the authority and long-lasting impact of the British Empire.
It's interesting that there aren't a lot of set-in-stone objects that are around that do symbolize something like the British Empire, despite the fact that the British Empire was on this continent for a good number of years.
Of course, and particularly in what was a military town like Halifax, we have many more examples than a lot of other cities.
Very much so. But you'll find these all over the Commonwealth. You'll find them in many other countries. I've heard about them in India. Wherever the British were, they made sure that everybody knew that that was where they were going to stay.
So this is truly a universal symbol.
Very much so. Everybody that knows anything about military history knows what this represents. We have moved a number of examples into this park, and I can show those to you if interested.
That would be great.
All right. This gun right here is actually a Victorian model.
There's of course the broad arrow, but then there are a number of other symbols. We have what I think is the royal cipher there, but this is one I'm not familiar with here, Rick. What would this be?
The royal cipher will begin with that one because every single one of these guns, the cipher is from the crown of that period. So over here we have George I. This one, as you know, is Queen Victoria. One up here is the Master of the Ordnance. Every single gun has to be proofed before it's accepted by the Navy. So the Master of the Ordnance goes on it once it's been proofed.
Right, and then this here, would that be a date?
That's the date. This gun is 1856. Roman numerals, you will find that on many of them, but you'll also find just an ordinary date.
So there's a tremendous amount of information contained within one of these
very
guns.
much so, very much so. The only thing, unfortunately, we don't have is where it came from.
Right.
I have another example of one of the stone markers up here. It's got different marks on it, so I'd like to show you the variety of the kind of markings that you'll find on these stones.
Oh, that'd be great.
Okay, come with me.
This marker seems to fulfill a similar purpose, but there are a number of different details on it. Why would that be?
This one was carved for the War Department, so it actually has a WD on it as well as the broad arrow, and it also has a number on it, number 1. This one comes from Fort Clarence, which was on the Dartmouth side of the harbor. It's also finished differently. It's chamfered over on the corners and much more finely carved than the one that we were looking at before. This would have been for a military site. Ordnance is not necessarily for a military site alone.
And I would assume that many details on these markers, including the more finished corner, could be down to the person who carved them.
Very much so. These granite markers came from a quarry out in Purcell's Cove, as did the ironstone for Admiralty House itself. That was from the King's Quarry. These are from the Queen's Quarry. The King's Quarry produced ironstone that was primarily used in the 18th century. The granite started being used around 1820. So most of the markers that you'll see in the Halifax area are granite. And there's even some that are carved on very large stones that are down on the shore. And that would mark the low water mark and the high water mark for the tides.
Rick, thank you for showing me the various examples of the broad arrow's usage. I'm excited to keep an eye out for these going forward as I'm wandering around Halifax and seeing where they are still ever present today as a lasting symbol of the British Empire.
Well, you're very welcome. It's been fun to go through these. In fact, there are clubs that do nothing but go out and look for stuff like this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you'll be welcome in one of them. People have always looked for symbols that represent who they are and where they come from. So the British broad arrow on these stones are highly sought out by a number of different people, both as a hobby and as a, what is this mark for?
Coming up, we're off to Stanley Airport to learn about the Christmas cards sent by British pilot John Hartley and the enduring love story behind them. At Stanley Airport, we're uncovering the enduring love story of John Hartley, a pilot who trained in Windsor during the Second World War. Through Christmas cards sent to Merle Dunbar, we'll explore a connection that survived the trials of war and eventually brought them back together. Mark, on a day like today, it seems sort of funny to be talking about Christmas cards.
It is. It's such a great day here at the lovely Stanley Airfield. But I think we're going to see something here that my friend Mike has got that could be of interest to you. Why don't we go look at that?
I'd love to go see that.
Stanley was one of 32 elementary flying training schools across Canada. The pilots would come and learn to fly a very basic aircraft, and they would do roughly 8 hours before they allowed to solo. In a lot of cases, they didn't make it that far because they washed out, and they would be remustered as other type of aircrew.
Thank you for having us into your hangar, Mike. We have a really interesting selection of Christmas cards here. What can you tell me about them?
Well, these Christmas cards, first of all, are from the wartime years. They were printed for Stanley, and this particular one here actually tells a very interesting story. This particular Christmas card was sent to a local young girl by one of the young men that was sent here to train to be a pilot. His name was John Hartley.
John Hartley was a trainee pilot and had been sent out from England for his training in Canada as part of this British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. John would have been brought to Stanley to do his initial elementary flying training.
While he was here, the RCF made an effort to keep the troops entertained, and one of the things was they built a recreation hall here in 1943, and they used to have dances. Well, one night at one of those dances, John met a beautiful, charming local young girl by the name of Merle Dunbar, and this is actually his Christmas card to her that year, 1943, and there's his writing that he sent to her. This card is interesting, what's printed on the inside. First of all, as you can see, they had the setup of the training command, and John at the bottom here, he drew a line to the pilot's wings and also another one to the bombardier's wings, and he wrote, "I might be this or this." So at this time in his training, he didn't know where he was going to end up. As, again, this was an elementary flight training school, so he wasn't really sure what was to become of him.
We can see from the Christmas card that John Hartley sent, he still wasn't sure if he was going to make it as a pilot. And even after doing EFTS here, he wasn't sure that he would either be a pilot or a bomb aimer. It's one thing to master and get your 8 hours and become solo, but the next is another course where you fly a much bigger, much more powerful aircraft.
Mike, do we know which direction John Hartley ended up going? Did he become a pilot or a bomber?
That's a little bit of a mystery. We don't know exactly what he did during the war. We do know that after the war, he was a flight lieutenant in the Royal Air Force Air Training Corps. So it's a bit murky of where he went, and it's more difficult to get records from the RAF than it is for us to find in the RCAF. So we're not really sure.
Part of the story, obviously, is the fact that a young 19, 20-year-old training pilot was basically pitched out of his home in the UK, in this case, and sent to Stanley, Nova Scotia, which in 1940, this really was the middle of nowhere, not really close to any sort of major towns or big centers. And they would have had to come here and made their own entertainment. And I think the RCF, obviously, they built a recreational hall here, and they wanted to entertain the troops, as they say. So I think that certainly is part of, obviously, this story.
And I'm sure it was the case with all BCATP bases across Canada. You know, they made the effort to, as you say, keep the troops entertained. And this is just one of the things that sprang from it. I'm sure there was dozens and dozens of other stories to say.
The impact, both economically and socially, was very significant for a very small rural part of Nova Scotia, where all of a sudden an airfield was going to be built, there would be construction, there would be jobs, and most of the people that actually worked here were drawn from the surrounding community. In addition, the local rural community had access to, now there was a hospital on the base here, there were medical people. It's really quite significant when you think about the real increase of bringing people from around the world to a very quiet, rural piece of Nova Scotia.
And I'm sure it was quite exciting for all the young ladies around to have all these dashing young pilots coming into the area.
I get that sense when you read the daily diaries of Stanley during the wartime. They actually used the phrase that when these dances started that, quote, local ladies were bussed in. So by the sounds of things, they went around and there was no shortage of takers to come in and dance with the boys in blues. I think those times here were very intense for young people during the war, and this was a story that endured. They met, started dating, fell in love. He went back to England, served in the RAF during the war and afterwards. She stayed here, she became a teacher. He actually became a teacher and a headmaster of a school. Years later, they both married, both had children, both raised families. John's wife sadly passed in 1989. His children were grown, and he came back to find her. He was in his 70s by then. Merle was still here. Her husband had passed away, unfortunately. The two of them rekindled the romance. So it's sort of one of those stories that's kind of inspirational, I think, a love that transcended a war, a lifetime, and an ocean, and still survives. So that's what this card is all about.
Love does conquer all, in a sense, because Hartley would come back to Nova Scotia and revisit his old training airfield here at Stanley. And then he would meet up with his girlfriend from the time that he was here. And actually, the unrequited love was recommenced.
And so she'd held on to these cards for all those years.
All these cards, yes, some of them were from a friend. They donated them together. Merle just passed in 2019. She was 96.
Mike, obviously these were donated by John and Merle, but what have you found further from them?
Good question. You know, when we first started looking into this, there were really a lot of blanks. But I had the pleasure of meeting with Merle's daughters, Andrea and Barbara. They came out to the hangar and sat, and we had a great chat. And they told us the story of her mom and how John, they thought, was a lovely, quintessential British gentleman. They thoroughly enjoyed his visits. They liked him very much. And they filled in the blanks. They told about how they met, and they said during the war, John was often invited to Sunday supper at Merle's mom's house. Going for supper at a local's house, that was part of what you were alluding to earlier on, how the community became involved with the trainees. They were welcome in homes. That connection was very much there, and you know, these two were certainly part of that.
Mike, thank you so much for taking your time to show us these wonderful cards today. It's been great to be able to uncover that story of John and Merle and hear what is, I'm sure, quite a common story in many ways of those young men coming over and coming to these rural Canadian towns and falling in love and then having to go over and fight in the war. But this is such a unique one because he did make his way back.
That's right. Yeah, very inspirational. I think kind of a warm story, I think.
After the break, I'll explore the history of load-bearing equipment, uncovering the innovations that have transformed soldiers' equipment from humble beginnings to today's high-tech gear. At the Army Museum, we're exploring the evolution of load-bearing equipment from simple leather belts to today's advanced modular systems. These innovations have significantly increased soldiers' effectiveness and comfort, adapting to the ever-changing demands of warfare. When we hear the term load-bearing equipment, what exactly is that referring to?
So load-bearing equipment is sort of like a catch-all term that's applied to all equipment through history that soldiers wear on their backs that hold all of their gear for them. And I have a few examples through history. If you just come right here, I can show you.
Excellent. This is quite a selection we have in front of us and seems to span sort of a period from the First World War to the present. But tell me, what would come before that First World War uniform in terms of load-bearing equipment?
For the First World War, for the Canadians and earlier the British, it's all leather. Everything is all leather equipment. That was just the technology they had at the time. They didn't have the industrial capacity to produce, synthetic materials or heavy cotton equipment like this is. So the leather equipment back then, it was a bit constricting in comparison to newer stuff. There's lots and lots of belts and lots of cross straps that go across the chest and around the waist. And that is where the 1908 webbing equipment, which is what the Commonwealth armies are using in the First World War, this basically changes the game in load-bearing equipment. The two big innovations with this is that it's not leather anymore. They've changed to cotton canvas, which is just so much more durable and so much more rugged, as well as the way the equipment is set up, sort of modular, and nothing comes in front of the chest. With a lot of leather equipment, the straps that come across the chest, they constrict your breathing. It makes it just harder to march around and fight because your chest is compressed by all these leather straps with heavy equipment bearing down on them. So with the 1908 equipment, it just prevents that. It's got shoulder straps that connect to the waist belt in the back. Everything has been removed from the front of the chest, and all of these pieces can be taken off separately and reattached to other places, whatever was comfortable for the soldier.
So this 1908 pattern, this was a very important innovation.
Yeah, it was a huge innovation. This changed the game and influenced webbing equipment for the entirety of the 20th century. It all starts with the 1908 equipment. The design philosophy of this equipment is used all the way through into the 1990s.
So that's the 1908 pattern, Nick. Can you take me from that to where we are today?
For sure. So the next set I have here, this is the 1937 pattern equipment. So this is what Canadian soldiers are wearing in the Second World War. And this one does everything the 1908 equipment does, but does it better. The downside of the 1908 is that they built this for the riflemen and the riflemen only. So all these pouches here, they carry your ammunition, and then on your back, you've got your pack, your haversack for food, and your large pack for your extra kit. But there's no other space for other fighting equipment. And in the First World War, they developed, the light machine gun, the bombers, guys that are specialized roles that don't necessarily always fight just with their rifles. And that's what the 37 equipment improves upon, is these two pouches on the side here. These are called basic pouches. The idea behind them is they hold anything any soldier could need on the battlefield, this could hold. So everything fit into this, so you didn't need to issue guys separate equipment for separate jobs. But going to the third set right there, this is the 1964 pattern equipment. The big change they made was that instead of buckles and hooks like you have on the 37 and the 08, they changed everything to Velcro. It's easier to take off and put onto the belt, but if it's getting wet, if it's just being used too much, which your standard soldier can be using this quite a bit, it will just give way and fall off of you. With armies, it's always when they're developing this new sort of equipment, there's always different perspectives they can look at it. It has to be durable, it has to be comfortable, it has to be rugged and functional and built to last. Sometimes they go off too far in one direction and it doesn't work so well and they have to go back. It's always that ebb and flow of trying new things, if they don't work out, pulling it back, and trying something else.
I would think that those issues with the Velcro would have been a major problem, given a lot of the design of these would surround the issue of durability, would it not?
Yes, and in procurement, sometimes you just make mistakes. Sometimes, you can look at army procurement from the 18th century all the way to modern day, and with 20/20 vision and hindsight, you can see why would they ever do that. That was what they thought was a good idea. They're like, this is something new, it makes it simpler, it's probably cheaper, let's try it out. And sometimes it end up just not working out at all. And this happens, this isn't the only example of that happening. There's plenty of army equipment that has been brought into service, and then it turns out this stuff is nowhere near as good as the stuff it's replacing. That is what you can see with the 1982 pattern equipment. They bring it back to the philosophy of the 37. Rather than webbing, cotton webbing now, it's made of nylon, so it's even tougher than that cotton webbing. It doesn't absorb water, doesn't get any heavier when it's wet. And they go back to buckles and hooks, which, they don't fail unless they rip right off the equipment. For Canadian equipment, this is the last set of webbing equipment that's issued.
So we go from the 1982 design to where we are today. When does that take place?
This is starting to develop in the late 1990s with the CAD-PATS camouflage. By the early 2000s, you've got the Canadian Army outfitted with what's called the tactical vest. We've moved on to the tactical vest rather than having web equipment, so a whole vest that just comes over your body rather than separate parts all attached to a belt. And even that is being innovated, where what we have now is design where the vest can be modular. You can take the pouches off and reattach them other places on the vest. So every soldier can do what he feels is best for him. Through the 20th century, the equipment, it changes through time and innovations are put in with the common theme of it's got to be durable, it's got to be comfortable, and it's got to carry all that gear in a way that is useful to him.
Nick, thank you for sharing this with me today. I'm sure it was considerable effort to put all these various examples together. It's been very interesting to go back and look at the history of load-bearing equipment and see those times along the way where the innovation didn't go quite as intended and things perhaps weren't quite as durable as we would have liked. So it's been very interesting.
Thank you for having me on.
It's been my pleasure. Having special access to go beyond museum exhibits reveals some of history's best-kept secrets and most interesting stories. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of military artifacts on another episode of Militaria at the museum.